Hi everybody. So we're going to get started with our first group critique of the one-point perspective, the shapes in one-point perspective. I'm excited to get started with that. But before we do, I just wanted to make a very quick announcement, which you may already be aware of. I believe that the school posted an announcement about it. Let me just pop into the classroom. So here we are in the learning path for milestone one, and I just wanted to mention that there's a little bit of a glitch in the classroom. When you're looking for the instructions, make sure that you go from this view right in here, just in the learning path. So let's see here. We'll just go to the instructions here, which you've probably already done. Rather than, let me show you where the glitch is happening. If you go um, to the post here thread right in here, okay. And then you see this link right here. If you click on the review task instructions, it has an error page. There's some kind of glitch with the links through all of the different pages. You'll find that this is true for all of the assignments at this point. I think they're trying to work on it and fix it. Um, Hopefully they'll be able to do that soon, but just be aware that it's for the time being anyhow, make sure that you head into the instructions area using the learning path that we just looked at. Okay, let me know if you have any questions about that. Okay, so you'll notice that when I review assignments, I actually use a combination of Adobe software to do that. I often will review directly in an Adobe software called Bridge, which you may have seen before. I just use it because it's easy for me to put files up like this, and sometimes I'll just review a drawing entirely in Bridge or do an entire critique in Bridge. And I can click on the drawing. You'll see I'll click on the drawings and they'll open up a little bit bigger in a minute. And then sometimes I'll go to Photoshop because Photoshop allows me to maybe do some drawing manipulation. So just to let you know what you'll be seeing me working in this class is either Bridge or Photoshop. And so speaking of Photoshop and looking at drawings, one of the interesting things about this class is because it's an online drawing class, we're taking a traditional media, which in this case is drawings, paper, pencil and paper, and we're digitizing them. And you guys are doing that by either scanning or photographing your drawings. So this is really, in a way, a skill in and of itself to be able to do this. But there's a few ins and outs on how to do this correctly. So what I'm going to do in week one for this task and then the next task, which is due on Thursday, is I will spend a little bit of time on each of your drawings talking about if there's anywhere we can improve, because then you can kind of fine tune your presentation skills and use them for the rest of the class. And it'll be very useful. Just looking at this grouping here, I'll say that Amy, uh, right here, yours looks pretty good, and same with you, Michelle. Yours looks actually really very, I think it's like really, we'll look at it close up, but so far it looks like you're going to be able to just use this method for the rest of the class. And then Brianna and Angela, you're getting close. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about just a few things that we can do to improve those. Um, okay, well, let's get started. Hey, Amy, yeah, you said you had a little bit of problems uploading, that your upload stopped. That can happen, for various reasons. Hopefully that won't, if that happens again, just try again. Um, but hopefully it was just a momentary thing. It can happen just because of your internet or the school's internet. Um, you know, it's sort of the nature of being online. Okay, well, I think you did a nice job here. You've got I think a really good understanding of one point perspective where you have all of your lines here are all moving towards the um, the one point. And we're starting with one point because it's the simplest form of perspective because we only have one vanishing point. And what one point perspective essentially is, if you could summarize it, it's where we always face the shape straight on. It's like if you stand in front of a house where you try to get it so you're standing straight on, like everything, there's no angles on the front. right here on the front. Like in this case, it's 90 degrees. These are 90 degrees. That's what being in one point perspective is. And what that means is we only need one vanishing point because everything vanishes to that one point because we're straight on. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the way I understand it. So, yeah, so it looks pretty good. And so it looks like you're also showing some examples of diminution. That means this, you're showing is essentially this. It works really well when you have the same shape that's getting smaller and smaller, and it kind of shows that it gets further away. Um, and you also have, let's see, some shapes that are see-through and some that are solid, which is good. And you've got some sides foreshortened, which is great. And you also have well over 9 shapes. It looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. A lot of that's great. 9 was the minimum, so it's always good to go above the minimum. So I would say the only things you want to do here, just a couple of things here, is I would end. Let me just get a color out here so I can draw on your drawing. Just give me just a second here. So I would end some of these shapes that aren't ended rather than having them go all the way to the vanishing point, right? So, just kind of draw horizontal lines to complete them, just like so. Wait, that's not very straight, but you'll do a better job than I did. And I think, and then this one here, just kind of complete those three. And then make sure that, when you're drawing, so your guidelines are lightly sketched in, which is great. And then your edges are darkened, which is great. That's exactly what you want to do. Just, there's a few areas in here where you might want to just darken, those edges just to make them all even. And, maybe here too, you could go in here and just kind of, there's a little line here that you could just darken. Perspective, like, unlike, especially when you're learning perspective, I think the kind of more sort of precise you are, the better. Even though in many other types of drawing styles, like observational drawing, we encourage, a more messy or loose or kind of, a kind of a style that isn't that precise, just because it can look quite beautiful. Um, and you can develop your own style that way. But in perspective, I think that it really you can sort of understand it better and demonstrate the the perspective forms a lot better with precision, which is I think you're really working towards that. Finally, here too, even with foreshortening, think about just shading in a little bit more of a sort of slow manner, kind of filling it in nice and evenly. And again, there's different ways to shade in other types of drawing and even in perspective, but it's sort of the sort of more even that you can draw it, the more your forms will look three-dimensional, which is what we're always aiming for in perspective, is to make things look very sort of solid and kind of really clear form. Okay, so that's what I'd recommend for the final submission. Oh, and your presentation, now that I'm looking at it more closely, I think it looks great, and I think you can just keep going the way you're going here with in terms of photographing or scanning or photoshopping, whatever you're doing with the drawing. Like in terms of presentation, what we're always aiming for is like the paper is as close to white as possible, because that's what it is. So when you try to document it, you want to try to keep it white. And then you want, your pencil lines to show up, with the range of value, which you have. So, yeah, again, just keep going with that. Okay, Michelle. Yeah, all right. Yeah, you definitely also did a good job here at demonstrating an understanding of one point perspective, which is great. I think your presentation, your documentation of your drawing is excellent. Just keep doing whatever you're doing in terms of um, photographing, scanning, or scanning, and photoshopping your drawing, which is very nice. Um, and so let's see here. So I would say, and you also have a lot of shapes, which is great. And some of them are foreshortened, and some of them are opaque and solid. So I would say just the things that I would maybe work on a little bit more is make sure that your guidelines are a little bit more lightly sketched in. You want a significant difference between the guideline and the edge of your shapes. So there's different ways to do that. I mean, probably the easiest and recommended way is to work with a really hard, like a hard pencil, like one of the H pencils that you have, the 2H or the 4H, and use that to start with your guidelines, and then take a softer pencil and then go and do, the edges of the shapes, the edges and also the interiors if you're doing a see-through drawing. Um, and or, you can also really, you can sort of kind of fudge just one pencil by drawing, using it at a very sharp point, very lightly, light pressure, um, to do the guidelines, and then go back and do, with more pressure on the edges. Again, that's, kind of probably not the recommended way, but, you can get away with doing that. Um, and just like I mentioned to Amy, just make sure that you finish, you want to just make sure that you finish all your shapes. So you would go in here and just finish this shape in here. I think that's the only, yeah, maybe this one right here. Just kind of make sure that you kind of complete your shapes. Um, this area here this is a really interesting kind of grouping, but it's a little hard to kind of make out what's happening in here. It looks, it's gotten so complex. So I might just actually try something a little simpler. You don't have, when you do the diminution, you don't have to necessarily put them all together in a row. You could just have some, basic, some like, squares that are in a similar place, that just get smaller. So I might redo this area, you know, and sometimes what I find, and you'll hear me recommending this in the group critique often, especially when we're doing sort of these simpler drawings, which maybe your first time might have taken a bit of time, but if you do them another time, like just get a new piece of paper and start again, it often goes way faster than if you try to do erasing, because you'll have learned it. It's actually really good practice, and it's less frustrating, I think, to do it again. So I'd really recommend, just whipping up a new drawing. Um, and this shape right in here at the bottom, let's see what's happening here. It looks like, yeah. Okay, so here it is. What's happening here is because this is so close to the horizon line is right here, and this is above. Sometimes they get kind of quite flattened at this point, and they're a little harder to draw because you don't have that much space. So I think that just maybe coming back in here, sort of like, so this would be parallel. So I think you just want to draw it a little bit more parallel to, this line right here, or this line right here. That should, help clarify that bottom a little bit more. You're just seeing the tiniest bit here. But again, if you do it again, you'll find that your precision really goes up when you do it. So, okay, that's what I'd recommend. Okay, Angela, so I opened yours in Photoshop to just see if we can tweak this, well, maybe a little bit. I think maybe it's actually, now that I had my screen a little bit darker and I just lightened it up, and it actually looks pretty good. You could maybe lighten it a tiny bit up. If you go to image, you can, there's so many different ways to do it. I think that exposure, you can try doing exposure. Sometimes let's just try doing an auto tone. That's one of my favorites. So that's actually a pretty good trick to do. So I just, in Photoshop, auto tone, auto contrast, and color, they kind of do the same thing. I might just do auto tone or auto contrast. And they'll tend to kind of, Photoshop in a sort of smart way will automatically try to see if it can turn it back to the original, what it thinks would be the original color of whatever it is it's photographing. So, you might give that a try. It's super easy fix. But again, I don't really think that the drawing, otherwise it's really in focus, and it's got a lot of detail. So I think you did a pretty good job here at photoshopping it or scanning it. Okay, so you've got 9 shapes here, which is great. And I think that they're doing a really good job here at converging back to the one point, which is really good. And it looks like your guidelines are lightly sketched in and your edges are darkened. And you've got some of your sides foreshortened, which is wonderful. And it looks like you've got a little bit of diminution here where you're seeing this shape here as further away. This shape is further away, even further, so that's really great. Um, and yeah, so I would say that, What I might, so a couple, just a few things you could do here. One is, with the shapes that are a little more see-through, you could darken these edges in just a little bit more. They can be as dark as the outside edges. Maybe darken, just in there. Um, and then maybe you could add a few more shapes. The assignment asks is for 9 as a minimum, but if you have a little extra space like up in here or maybe in here, you could definitely add just maybe a few, 2, 3 more shapes. It's always good to, go beyond the assignment requirements if you can, but otherwise I think this is looking really good. Nice job. Okay, Brianna. Yeah, in yours too, at least on my end, it looks quite, can you see there's a little bit of kind of mottling and pink and blue in here? Um, Once again, there's different ways of fixing it, but I'm actually just going to do the same thing. It's a little bit above the recording screen, but the same thing that I did with Angela, which is I'm just going to use maybe the auto tone here. And you can see that fixes it up a little bit. It lightens it. You could also go to adjustments, up in the adjustments, right? Also in the image menu, image adjustments, and go to black and white. And what that actually does is it'll knock out some of the pinks in there. Um, so even though, when you photograph a drawing, or I don't know if you scanned this or photographed it, but let's just say you photographed it. Um, what'll happen is that even though it's a black and white drawing, there still can be kind of like color that's on the drawing from reflected light, for example, or just kind of, ambiance. And so the camera will actually start coloring in uh, a black and white object. Typically it does like almost does like a yellow tone. Yours is a little bit different than that, but it kind of picks up whatever's happening in there. So you can fix it just like the way I've done here, or rephotographing it and experimenting with the lighting in your room can sometimes help. But I think photoshopping it would do a good job. Okay, so I think you also did a good job here at understanding 1-point perspective. It looks like all of your shapes are converging really nicely, which is great. And you've got the required 9 shapes, which is wonderful. And you've got some of them are opaque, some of them are solid, and you've shaded in these edges, which is great. So I would say the main thing I would say is to work a little bit more on craft. Um, when you're working on your guidelines, really try to get a nice clean line with a lighter pencil. And then darken in those edges so you see a real distinct difference between the guidelines and the darkened edges. Slow down when you're shading, to make a nice even strokes. Again, that sketchy look, which I love in drawings, freehand drawings. In perspective, we tend to try to go for more even, sort of slow down shading so that you can really show the forms off. And then, sometimes too, when you have smaller shapes like you do here, they can be hard to draw. Like it looks like your lines here are a little bit, kind of little bit not that precise. So draw a little bit bigger when you work on your shapes. Like use more space. You've got a lot of empty space here, so make your shapes just a bit bigger, and you'll find that it's easier to work with the lines. Because when you're drawing really small, it's really hard to get a precise line. Keep your pencil really sharp. If you're, sometimes a dull pencil can give you kind of uneven lines as well. So that's, I think, the main thing here. And then you could also add in a few more shapes here to exceed that 9, minimum. And, like I mentioned before, I think erasing takes so much time, and I bet if you just grabbed another piece of paper, you could redo this in a quarter of the time, and you know, really get um, a really great drawing out of it. So, okay, I think that's about it, everybody. I'm sure we'll have a few more people submitting, but I wanted to make sure that I typically like to do the group critique right the day after, so that you always know you can, unless I'm sick, or hopefully that doesn't happen, but I like to do it the morning after a or after an assignment is due, so that you can get feedback right away, and then you can start working on it for the Sunday deadline, which is the final submission. And that's where you're going to be taking your finalized draft of your drawings. Um, There'll also be a small written component in there that you're going to submit. You'll see in the final submission area instructions, and that's due on Sunday of every week.